Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. We really appreciate your presence here tonight. I just want to welcome everyone to this talk, Feminism, Abolition, and the Fight to Close Down Huron Valley. Before we get started, I would like to thank everyone who made tonight's event possible. Of course, the Barry M. Klein Center for Culture and Globalization, Oakland University's Women and Gender Studies, and a very special hearty thank you to the generous support of Color of Change. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Color of Change, it is an organization which develops campaigns powerful enough to end the practices that hold Black people back unfairly until justice is real. You may have seen their billboard coming down 96. I saw it just the other day. I want to encourage everybody to drop your questions in the chat if you have them. I'll be monitoring the questions and dialogue that happens in the chat. At this point in time, I'd like to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about their work. Maybe we could go with the order of Dream, Siwatu, and then Natalie.
Okay, awesome. Hi, everyone. My name is Dream Hampton. I'm visiting chair at the Barry M. Klein Center at Oakland University. I'm also a filmmaker and a longtime writer. I am also a longtime organizer and activist who believes that, culture can transform the world that we live in. And I will pass it to Siwatu.
Thank you, Dream. You're always so modest in introducing yourself. You just absolutely, you just do it so well. And I'm gonna try to model it after you. Hello, everyone. And I'm from Detroit, so we also say what up, though, or greetings, or what's good, all of that. My name is Siwatu-Salama. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, born and raised, born to a legendary environmental justice organizer and movement leader from Detroit. And so I very much come out of movement, come out of the resistance, but more so politicized in the environmental justice, climate justice movement in Detroit, where, we empower community people to step in and understand the power to change the conditions of their communities. And so I've been doing that work for a little bit of time. And then, I think what brings me to this space is my newest commitment around prison abolition and the work around demilitarizing our communities through a feminist or womanist or femme perspective. And I'm glad to be here today. And I'll pass it to my homie, Natalie.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. Dream, thank you. Rebecca, thank you. So my name is Natalie Holbrook. I'm the program director for the American Friends Service Committee's Michigan Criminal Justice Program. We advocate for and with people who are incarcerated in Michigan's prison system. We work for liberation for as many people as we possibly can get free. And we think that prison is not a solution to our social harms. And so we work actively against the prison system and work for alternatives to how we heal harms in the communities. And I've been doing this work a long time and really grateful to be able to talk with you all. I also work with a couple of Washtenaw County-based organizations and doing real deflection work and alternatives to imprisonment. So care-based safety work is something I've been very involved with, and Liberate, Don't Incarcerate, which is we ran an abolitionist campaign to get the best prosecutor, which it was a form of harm reduction in the abolitionist world. And then I also am a mom. I have a daughter and a stepson, and my wife is here calling in from Women's Huron Valley Prison. One of the greatest blessings of my life, besides my daughter, was meeting Tashina through this work. And we met many, many years ago. She's my best friend, and I'm gonna have her introduce herself also real quick. Go for it, babe.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Siwatu, Natalie. So great to hear Dream Hampton's voice. I am familiar with your work. I'm so grateful to be here. My name is Tashina Holbrook, and I'm from Pontiac, just 30 minutes outside of Siwatu's hometown, Detroit. I've been warehoused behind a double barbed wire fence, caged like an animal for almost 24 years. During this time, I have worked with inside staff and outside volunteers to develop, then build, then teach trauma-specific tools for healing and recovering, interpersonal skills and critical thinking, effective communication, conflict resolution, and becoming women of positive influence. I've also created book clubs where we have studied self-help books and novels with the purpose of helping to keep our minds focused on productive, uplifting material during the pandemic when all of our world shut down in here. And I'm so honored to be present with all of you powerful women engaged in creating a world without prisons.
I would, since we have Tashina Combs, and I have read your poetry, Tashina, and I'm honored to be on the phone with you right now. And I realize that there might be restrictions on your time. So I would maybe like to start off with asking you a question that I would love for all of you to, I mean, you've thrown out some terms, and we don't have a lot of people who've joined now, but this is recorded and students will be able to access it later. And you've thrown out some terms, and I want to make sure that, you know, folks know what those terms mean. So abolitionist was a term that you used. Harm reduction was a term that I heard. Healing justice was a term that I heard. So Tashina, if you want to take on any one of those words, I also heard the militarization. I think you said Siwatu community militarization, but militarization as it relates to our communities would also be a good thing to define. But Tashina, if you would take any one of those, harm reduction, abolition, restorative or transformative justice, and define them for our students, I would appreciate it greatly.
Well, for me, I think I would be best time to talk about the restorative practices. And I believe that for myself in my situation, it was conflict between young women in the community that a lot of women in our communities experience, dating the same young man. And then that turning into conflict that escalated into violence that tragically ended in someone dying. And then me being incarcerated with a life sentence without parole, when I tried to get help in resolving this conflict prior to it ever escalating. And restorative practices for me means me, of course, being held accountable, because I do believe in accountability. I do believe that when we cause harm to anyone in our communities, that we do need to be held accountable. I also believe that accountability does not mean being thrown away for the rest of your life. Outside of the community that you come from, and segregated and isolated from your family and the community that you come from, and really never really allowed to repair that harm caused, to work toward paying it forward in the community, to do something to bring community back together, right? And so for me, I have spent my time here doing just that, trying to pour into other young women that I know will be returning to society, to try to influence them in some way to have a positive impact in their community when they return. Because I don't want people returning to the communities that my family live in and potentially causing harm to them. So I think that also for me, at this place that I'm in now, 24 years later, there is a family member of one of the young women who I was responsible for killing, and her brother is now reaching out to have restorative and healing conversations with me that we are working now to bring that to fruition. And I believe that that's where it starts, because I was a community member I was your neighbor. I was someone's neighbor. I went to work every day. I paid taxes. I took care of my son. I was a single parent raising my child in the community, working 18 hours a day to take care of my son. And I was going to PTA meetings. I was the girl in my hood that took mothers to visit their sons in prison. I was the girl that wrote letters to young men in prison. To be a member of a community and then be snatched away from that community, and for the community, because we've been so, what did you call it, Siwatu, militarized, because we've become so complacent to this, being our family members and community members being taken from us and thrown away, without a blink of an eye. Right, and it's time for us to start questioning, where are the people that were our neighbors? Where are those people? What happened to them? And start to build bridges for them to come back home and be positive contributing members to our society. So restorative practices for me means holding us accountable, but in a way that's healing to all parties, not just the state. Saying the people of the state of Michigan versus, and then throwing that person away like they were just garbage and not actually members of the community.
Tashina, while we still have you, I do want Siwatu and Natalie to help me define the other words that we talked about: harm reduction, militarization, and abolition. But while we have you, can you talk to me about, I'm assuming that you met Siwatu inside, and a large part of this panel is about maternal justice inside of Huron Valley, and people who are giving birth inside, who have children, particularly infants. I know that, Siwatu's journey, she went inside an organizer, and they probably put the wrong one inside, because just like you, she was already someone who was going to turn up and make change. And so she immediately began doing that. Can you tell me about meeting Siwatu and about the work that y'all have been doing for people who give birth inside and people who have infants on the outside? So this connects to like actual birthing, this connects to breastfeeding, expressing breast milk.
So I was a mentor. I was mentoring in a residential substance abuse treatment program, which was kitty corner community, pregnancy unit that she lived in. I never really directly met Siwatu while she was here, but I knew of her. I had heard of her because of the activism that she had done, and because she had worked to draw women together while she was here to make changes. And of course, my antennas go up when things like that of that nature happen. It's ironic because actually Siwatu and I were supposed to be bunkies, which is the cellmate. We were supposed to live in the same room together. At one point, I was supposed to move to her side of the unit to mentor the young women who come in pregnant, and then that just didn't end up transpiring. So I didn't actually get to meet her until after she was already free, and I met her through my wife. You have 1 minute remaining to the work that they did, but my contribution to the pregnancy program and the policies that they've worked to bring into the facility to affect the women here has been to provide information and to be connectors with the women who are here in order to be able to give them the phone numbers and the contact information on how they can advocate for themselves and have their family members advocate for them also. So it's been a privilege to work alongside Natalie and Siwatu, who are both very strong, powerful, just presences and forces in this work, and have helped so much to bring change. And there's a woman here that lives in the unit with me now who was a recipient of some of the work that these women have done, and they have always expressed their gratitude for being allowed to have access to their children in a way that they probably wouldn't have without this. Thank you for using GTL.
That's always the worst part, right?
It is. I hate that. And we, the work that some part of the work that Color Change does is about the kind of profiteering that happens when folks are incarcerated, and how much those calls actually even cost, But so thank you, Natalie, for making that happen. We really appreciate it. You know, she just brought up a lot in terms, go ahead, I'm sorry.
You might call back also, so.
Okay, but let's get to defining the terms that we were talking about before we move forward. Who wants to take on, you know, prison abolition?
I could go. First, I want to say that I've met T. I remember meeting Tashina. She don't remember me because I was really like this, like in prison, like this, like, oh my God, you know what I'm saying? Because look, it was no joke. So, but also Tashina was one of the leading voices, and also like one of the like facilitators of this of the National Lifers Association, right, Natalie? Because I remember because the prison considered me to be high profile and actually did not allow me to interact with a lot of the general population. So a lot of the work that I did was actually like with the pregnant unit, the pregnant and postpartum unit. And then in between of like traveling to chow or traveling on the walkways, I was able to connect that way with like other women and folks, you know what I'm saying? And other, I want to call them inmates, and so the one space that they allowed me to travel to and kind of maneuver in was the National Lifers Association. And boy, that is the space that where I realized they were the actual masterminds and geniuses who was literally working to transform the system, because the National Lifers Association was primarily women who had to live there, had to stay there long sentences. And so it was up to them to do the hard work to transform and change and bring about the things that they needed. So a lot of the organizing work came directly out of that space. And that's where I met T. She don't remember me, but I remember her voice, like being like one of those strong voices. And then like, yes, very much like she said, once I came home, then then our lives started to connect more deeply through Natalie and through the work. And also I consider her to be, like my mentor, right? And very much like a consultant and like leading voice on the work that we're doing with the Freedom Team. So that's how, T is very much that person. And so to give a stab at like, what is abolition? And also, I don't consider myself to be like a scholar of abolition. I am very much a learner and student. But also I think the beauty of abolition is that this isn't a concept or like a theory that is just based on like how we abolish prisons, but it also is like interchangeable and relates to many different sectoral work, like movement work, whether you're in the climate world, the environmental world, the world to like liberate like what education looks like, like y'all, you know what I'm saying? Like you over there like abolishing like white supremacist, like, you know what I'm saying? Like forms of education and like making sure that platforms and conversations like this are like accessible to students, right? But basically prison abolition or abolition speaks to the process of like a multi-generational plan and process, like, cause it's gonna take some time. And this is like us holding a piece of that pie, right? So it's a multi-generational, even multicultural plan to end the prison industrial complex and all of the ways that it manifests in our communities and our lives. And so abolition is not just about closing prisons or ending police surveillance or ending police terror, but it is very much, it's so brilliant because it is also providing and envisioning what the alternative is, which is saying like, we don't just want to abolish these systems. They don't work. They absolutely don't work. And they have failed us over and over and over again. And that's our analysis. But also, here's what we want instead. So So, the things that we want to say is like the divestment from police, the divestment from prisons. Every time someone leaves a prison, that bed should never be refilled, and the resources that was meant to actually hold that person captive should be reinvested in the community through jobs, through education, through housing, through healthcare. And so then that's like saying, like, if our communities are actually invested in, right, that I have the things that I need to live, my children have the things that they need to live a full life, then you will automatically see a decrease of poverty, you will automatically see a decrease of criminalization. And so that's the genius that I think the abolitionist movement brings as an offering to the entire grassroots sector, not just the work around prisons, but it is very much interchangeable to all of different issues and focus work. And then Nat, if you want to also add to
Yeah. Or Nat, if you want to talk about harm reduction, just to throw out definitions, or also to add to, I've been adding some resources in the chat for and for people who will be watching online. I've added Ruthie Wilson Gilmore. Of course, her 2007 book, Golden Gulag, is kind of like the standard, and one of the, she's a founding member of Critical Resistance and helped come up with this framework in a lot of ways. Not that this framework didn't exist since Black people landed on this continent. I've also included Miriam Kaba's We Do This Till We Free. With Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, I put her most recent 2022 book, Abolition Geography, a collection of essays. With Miriam Kaba, I included We Do This Till We Free Us. And then Shira Hassan and Miriam Kaba have a great book called Towards Repair. All of those books do deeper dives on abolition and prison abolition. I'm sorry, Natalie, let me let you maybe take a stab at defining harm reduction and or militarization, or any of the phrases that we're throwing out, because I just don't want to assume that people know the definitions.
Yeah, so I think that we do forget that prisons are militarized spaces. And so even this year, the budget for the Department of Corrections in Michigan has over $7 million allocated to get body cameras for officers. And we know that body cameras have not worked when it comes to policing in America. And we know in the Department of Corrections that would be used even more intensely to probably penalize people in prison over penalizing or holding officers accountable, right? Because they control all the video footage, they control all the audio footage. The women's prison in Michigan is completely under audio and video surveillance, and most people don't understand that or know that. Men's prisons have some video surveillance, but not all audio, and that was out of a case called Neal, that was a sexual abuse case. It was the largest settlement, I think, in Michigan history. It was $150 million jury. It was a jury finding, actually, of massive sexual abuse that was happening against women in Scott Correctional Facility. And it was a culture of sexual violence in the prison. And that sexual violence hasn't gone away. So this is where abolition comes into play, is that the system itself is violent, and the system itself replicates abusive relationships. And so when you put women who have often experienced serious violence in their histories, both physical and sexual violence, 90% of women living in prisons in the US have experienced serious trauma in their histories. And then you put them into this violent environment where you're being told when you can go to the bathroom and when you can move out of your unit and when you can be out and about and who you can see and when you can call and how long that call can be. Those are all abusive pattern, domestic violence abuse patterns. And so I see the state as an abuser, and that the punishment system is just that, it's punishment. It's not an accountability system. And so the abolition of it is to incrementally, in some ways, because as Siwatu said, it's going to be a generational process of undoing hundreds of years of violence towards people who were stolen from Africa and brought here, and people who were torn apart by genocide who already lived in the US. And that is very much connected to the current prison system. The disproportionality of Black women throughout the United States in prisons is out of control. And in Michigan, it's even higher. So almost 50% of the women's population is Black. In Michigan, it's completely disproportionate to the population of Black women in Michigan. I think 7% of Michigan's population is Black women. So this is the practice of abolition is visioning something different for tomorrow, and we have to peel back and undo years and years and layers of harm that has come out of militarized systems that pursue, and we're talking in the context of women here, and non-binary people too, because there are non-binary and trans people that live in our women's prison, and their bodies are under attack by the state. And so I see this as harm reduction is what we did with the policy to provide opportunities for mamas to breastfeed in the visiting room, to stop the shackling, completely stop the shackling of women who were pregnant and giving birth, to allow more time in arms for an infant once a baby was born to an incarcerated woman, and to have a loved one present during that process, and to have a doula present. So those are some of the things we push for, and those are all harm reduction policy changes, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, because in Siwatu's case, the first thing that folks were fighting for was for her not to have to go inside at all when she was pregnant, because her sentence came down when she was pregnant, when she was visibly pregnant. And I remember that the appeals to Kim Worthy and the prosecutors was to stay the sentence, to postpone it. Because that is the ultimate call to close down the women's prison, period. But then also, we talk about these levels to not have pregnant people inside, period. One of the ways that we, and I know that your work for decades at this point now, Natalie, and I share this with you, has been about connecting people on the outside to the inside. I also want to say that the choice that Siwatu flagged about not calling people inmates or prisoners is a principled choice. It's a label that dehumanizes. These are folks who are inside, or as Tashina self-identified, caged inside inside the walls. So that's a choice that we're making. But one of the ways that connects us to them, and there is, as Tashina described, this segregation, this isolation, and it's meant to punish and separate us from our communities. But one of the ways that we're naturally it's unfortunate, but one of the ways that we're connected is this surveillance. I just in the chat put Tawana Petty's, she's from the Algorithmic Justice League, a longtime organizer in Detroit, her interview on NPR a couple of weeks ago about, her work has been ongoing to end, the surveillance that's happening in Detroit, the facial recognition. It began with the green light, and we can't get into all of that tonight, but what we're headed towards as AI develops is this predictive policing. So when someone like Natalie, who has these deep connections to people on the inside, who's working and advocating for people inside prisons, says that their every movement is photographed or videotaped, and there's audio surveillance, people who believe that people should be in there would be like, well, yeah, that's what prison is. That's what happens, and that's what should happen to you if you're guilty of a crime, right? And one of the things that connects us, particularly in poor neighborhoods of color, is that this is happening to us on the outside. We think we're free and our every move is being recorded. This surveillance is being like test driven inside these facilities and institutions. And then we find them in our own neighborhoods where we are simply trying to late night go get some better made chips, whatever. I want to talk, Siwatu, about your time inside. I've talked a little bit about the fact that when you were being sentenced, you were already pregnant with your son, and there were appeals made to keep you from going inside. But you did end up inside and you ended up giving birth inside. Can you talk a little bit about your experience and how that motivated you to work for change?
Yeah. To be transparent, like I was fighting a case that I pretty much understood to be under control. So I was fighting a case and also like organizing organizing a national conference to come to Detroit to talk about climate change. Like that's the business I had going on. And actually I didn't, reach out to my community for support until actually the moment of like that this majority, definitely not a jury of my peers, but once they found me guilty, right, because also so much, anti-Black woman who was armed, anti-Black organizer, like rhetoric and language was also was so present in that courtroom, which I believe was very much played a part into the conviction. But also, like I didn't know nothing else but to turn to my community, right? Which was actually the first time that we was like, okay, like this is what I'm going through. And my community in response was like, why didn't you come to us much sooner? Because it is so, when you're going up against such an aggressive and large system, which like the criminal injustice system, it does a really good job at isolating you and exhausting your resources. So they knew, like when we enter the system, we can't go in there alone. So I was very blessed and super blessed, and like to have my community in response tell me like, Siwatu, we got your back. We know that what the system is saying about you, which was basically like I was an angry Black woman with a gun that could only be that could not experience fear, or and I could only possess anger and and violence. That was enough to send me to prison. And actually, so thereon is like the thing that you choose from that moment on is the goal is to survive at that point, is to live and to survive, and to also like, how do I protect my children? Like I at that point, it wasn't even about me. It was about this baby that I was carrying. And also my at the time 2-year-old daughter who I had to be separated from. And so, yeah, we and also the thing that we do well is organize. So a lot of the ways that we knew to organize was actually a lot of the ways that we knew to organize against like pollutant facilities, right? So we use those same strategies and tactics against the prison system and the court system. And so we immediately started to make our demands, but also very cautiously, because you can't just walk up in the courtroom with demands. But I think, so yeah, some of the first, like you said, dream was like, keep Siwatu home, keep her home with her children, and also like, giving birth in the safety and care of your family and community. That was what we wanted. And that's what we immediately asked for, which was basically like, let me have this baby, fight with an appeal, and then possibly surrender my physical self after I've given birth to this child. And the court was not interested in that. Actually, it wasn't even the court, it was just this one man with tons of power, which was the judge. And when asking, and coming to him with that plea, he actually, his response was, and I quote, "She is not the first person to give birth in prison, nor will she be the last, and she has to go in." And so basically he had the power, right? So this is not this is, especially in Michigan and Wayne County, you have judges who have the power and discretion to do good things, or to do not even good things, like just the bare minimum, and we see otherwise. And so that also connected us to the reproductive rights and reproductive justice movements immediately because of that demand and because of that concern. I was considered to be high risk. I was already high risk pregnancy on the outside. And so going into a prison system that is absolutely has no capability of caring for a pregnant person, you're considered to be like extremely high risk, your pregnancy. And I know, all I know about prisons was that my brother did a lot of time, my father did a lot of time in prison, but I didn't have a direct understanding about what it was to actually be inside of a prison until I got there. And that's when, everything changed. And so the prison requires everyone to come in and do something called quarantine, which it ain't like the quarantine that y'all had to do during the pandemic. It is 23-hour lockdown. And they basically use that as a strategy to get people familiar with the prison system. This is prison boot camp. Like you're gonna get, that's the entry, that's the orientation to prison, 23-hour lockdown. For normal folks, for folks who are just coming in, you're not pregnant, you're not ill or fragile, and you're considered to be so-called healthy, you have to spend a term of 30 to 40 days in quarantine. So that's 23-hour lockdown for 30 to 40 days. But because I was pregnant and other folks who were pregnant, the most I stayed 23-hour lockdown was 23 days. So 23 days of 23 days, 23-hour lockdown with 1 hour out was the moment where I had to choose to literally live, because that's where I became dehydrated. Because I didn't have access, I just couldn't just get water, right? So I became extremely dehydrated. I developed, an illness that I could not, heal on my own because of the products in the prison. I lost weight, and then, so many other things that happened that ultimately sent me into early labor with Zakai. And I think that is where kind of like my story became like this national. And actually, I didn't know the protocols of what it meant to go and be sent out of the prison. And so we learned a lot at that moment. So we had to literally go through hell to learn what the system was capable of, what the prison was capable of, what they were doing to folks inside, what they were doing to pregnant folks inside. And that's when the shackling happened. That's when the shackling to the bed happened. That's when the shackling during vaginal exams happened. That's when, all of these all of the gore, all of the moments that I wouldn't wish on anyone. And so we had to go through that moment, and I say we because my community had my back, my family had my back. My mother, she carried me. Natalie had my, I remember, they were immediately connecting me to Natalie, which first time I talked to Natalie was over the phone inside the prison, because Natalie is literally like a weapon. Natalie's name was buzzing in the prison, because anything that was unjust that was happening to people inside the prison, folks knew to call Natalie Holbrook. And so that was me calling Natalie. And then that's when the campaign also started. The work around what the demands were and the goals were around drafting the language around the standards of care bill that we're talking about. So we started to document. So and even the letters that you see behind me on my background are letters of the women from the pregnancy unit, from the pregnant postpartum unit, letters that they wrote to their children, letters that they wrote to you all, to just encourage you to just stand in solidarity with them. And that was the start of like the inside outside strategy that we used to document what was going on inside the prison and then do something about it. And so it was a lot of work, y'all. It was a lot of work, but yeah.
We have Tashina back on the phone. Is that still true, Natalie?
Yeah, she's right here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Natalie, I would like for you to talk about the Standards of Care bill, but while we have Tashina, I would love, Tashina, for you to talk about the importance of what Siwatu just mentioned, which is an inside-outside strategy. Can you tell us what that means and why it's important?
Well, it's important because what goes on in the United States of the house is the mentality here, right? The abuses, I was listening to the last one, I was thinking about some of the conversations I recently had with Natalie, just about how the same abuses that happened and traumatic experiences that we experienced in our domestically violent relationships that we experienced in our abusive households that we grew up in, that the abuses that happened within our neighborhoods at the hands of young men, like the documentary that you did with Surviving R. Kelly, those same traumas, those same tactics that are used by abusers are the same tactics that are used by the prison, right? To silence us, to keep the community from knowing what exactly is going on in here. And they lie and they deny and they shift and pass the buck to other people to say that it's not their fault. They're just doing their job. They're just following policy. And it's important for people on the outside of this prison to be exposed to the truth of what is happening in here, right? Because there's power in numbers, there's power in people knowing, right? And you can't keep abuse can't continue to go on when people know about it, right? People that care know about it. People that have concern know about it. People that want to see a better remedies, better treatment, more holistic, healthy, restorative practices practiced in a state where their founding premise, there's court rules, the courts write all kinds of opinions that state that Michigan is the cornerstone. Their cornerstone premises, the belief is rehabilitation. And there's nothing about this system, this prison, that's about rehabilitation. And they are just now coming up with a policy that's the family reunification, which I think is a beautiful thing, which connects the community to the prison and to people in Lansing to have a say in what's happening with their loved ones in this prison. And I think that that's why it's important, right? Because anytime that somebody can come to work and have a bad day, and there are some, don't get me wrong, there are some people that have hearts and that may not shackle you as tight as the next person will, or may not, because I have been shackled also, not pregnant. And so my heart continues to go out to you for having had to experience that during your incarceration. But these are the things that we all experience at one point or another. Because if you have anything happen to you, you have to go to the hospital. You're shackled by your feet and chained at your feet and at your belly, with your wrists. And it's humiliating. It's degrading. When I went to the hospital, there were children sitting in the lobby, and I could barely walk because the shackles were cutting into my ankles. And yeah, and for the community to see that right? And people in the community at the hospital to see that and to be exposed to that in such a way. And for me to have to endure that, or for Siwatu to have to endure that, at some point, the same abuses that people have been convicted of, people have been sent to prison for, the state inflicts on people recklessly and carelessly and without any regard for human life, right? Or regard for any repercussions. And so for me, the inside out and making people aware on the outside and making them care enough to want to connect, not just on a level that you have 1 minute remaining, that challenges and confronts the authority, the people who have charge over this place, that connects people to the heart of the women that are here to put arms around us and tell us that we do care. We do care about you. You are loved. You are more than whatever crime or whatever harm you may have caused. You are more than that. You are worthy of healing and hope and restoration. And we're here to help restore you to wholeness and healthiness, right? And so for me, that's why it's important, the inside out approach and the outside in approach. For me, it's an outside in approach. The outside needs to know what's going on within this prison, and to know that we are more than whatever harms or poor decisions we may have made over a quarter of a century ago. For some, half a century ago. And I thank you, and I'm honored for even being a part of this, to have my voice heard. And thank you for using GTL.
Dream, you're on mute.
Again, Natalie, I want to thank you for bringing her into this conversation. I think it's so important. Can you talk about the demands of the bill and the state of that bill right now? We talked before the call about it now being a policy directive. But I know that this is something that you have been demanding of Whitmer's office and in the legislature in general. So can you please talk a little bit about the bill?
So the bill, we had worked very closely with Senator Geis, who is a rad legislator. She's the real deal, and she really cares about her people and her constituency. And she cares about mamas, and she cares about people, women in prison in particular, and people in prison. And so she introduced the Standards of Care bill, which had all these demands, and they were to allow, and I'll never forget, Siwatu, your mama waiting at our office when you were in labor. And we were begging the governor's office, it was Snyder at the time, to let her go and be bedside. And it didn't happen, but it happens for women now. So because of all these changes. So being able to have a loved one bedside was one of the demands. And a doula bedside and doula care with effective or with all the prenatal kind of vitamins that somebody needs. No shackling on during any exam at the hospital offsite or during labor or after labor were some of our demands. Allowing breastfeeding in the visiting room. Before this all happened, the only people who could even express their milk were people who were going to go home in 90 days. So it was a painful and terrible experience for Siwatu and for other mamas who were not allowed to be able to pump and dump. I mean, you could self-express, but you couldn't pump and dump, which is what the 90-day rule was. So that was waived, and there's breastfeeding allowed in the visiting room now. And we had demanded other things that we didn't get, but what ended up happening with the bill is it wasn't going to go anywhere in the Republican legislature. And maybe we could have worked it if we had had a co-sponsor, but we didn't, that was Republican. And so but Senator Geis was working behind the scenes with the executive branch, and we had a second bill that went along with it, which was the creation of an outside oversight committee, because you can create all the legislation in the world, and it doesn't mean that the state is going to follow it. The promulgation of rules and policies after a piece of legislation passes is so important, and so we wanted oversight at the women's prison, and we still need oversight at the women's prison. So that bill got. It's no longer active. And then the bill for the standards of care was made into a policy by the Department of Corrections, which is effectively law. And so the things that we didn't get, so all the things I listed, we got, and the things we did not get are, we wanted a mobile breastfeeding program, where mamas could pump their milk and it could be delivered to their infant. We had a whole nonprofit lined up. It's a women of color nonprofit that does breastfeeding work in all kinds of communities. They do storage and delivery, and they said no. And the other big demand was no guns in the labor and delivery room. So an officer is always armed, and they refused to budge on it. And so, and these were the most surreal conversations of my life. And Siwatu, I'm glad for so many of them that you did not have to be there, because this is like the importance of advocacy, I think, is having bridges, so that people who've been directly impacted by the violence of the state don't have to relive the surreal, militarized like crap that they come up with. And so those were the two things that we didn't get. And then they still will cuff women in the front, but there's no more leg shackles and belly chains upon movement to the hospital.
I just want to say, for people who haven't experienced this, and for me, Siwatu being inside and experiencing this was the closest that I'd ever come to knowing about this, or having someone that I cared about go through this. Like, it sounds absurd, right? It sounds like you said the word belly chain, right? And you're not talking about the cute little thing that you wear, that Beyonce wears on stage, right? You're talking about armed officers present when someone's giving birth. You're talking about denying children breast milk. And these are all things, if we were to take the Republican Party at its word, not that this is not that this harm belongs and this violence belongs to one party or another, but this is a party that pre-Trump totally marketed themselves as a family values party, right? They have, in this moment, this post-Dobbs moment, been petitioning to, restrict access to, say, reproductive rights and abortion, meaning that they're supposedly saying that they want women to have children, right? And these are the conditions that they're willing to subject some women to. I mean, obviously, the words that you just said, from shackling to belly chains, to not having privacy in the birthing room, and not having armed people there, all of this is like a direct hearkening. Sometimes it sounds hyperbolic when we talk about prisons as plantations, and we invoke slavery. It sounds hyperbolic for folks who have no understanding, but these are direct links to chattel slavery. There's no other way to put it. So yes, I'm happy that as a bridge, you're able to protect people who've experienced this violence. But I just want to say it's incredibly shocking still to hear it repeated. And I can't imagine the work it took to have to negotiate, well, we can have this, can you at least get rid of the shackles on the ankles if we have to keep the ones on? It's wild. It's wildly absurd, I just got angry. I'm sorry. So can you talk to us about, you said we didn't become a bill. We know that recently the Michigan legislature, having a Democratic majority for the first time in decades, went on a kind of bill passing spree. And I'm wondering, it sounds like Senator Weiss not abandoned, but strategically understood that she couldn't push this forward. And I'm assuming that that meant that it wasn't a part of the legislation that just got pushed through. And you talked about it now being a policy directive. What does that mean? And what does it mean for the warden or the people who are running Huron Valley?
Yeah, a policy directive is what governs the Department of Corrections. And so it is technically law. They have to follow it. It can be litigated in the courts if they don't follow it. And so it's a good thing that we got the standards of care that we did. We did not get oversight though. And I'm a little concerned because I was when the Republicans were still in the held the legislature, and we had a Democratic governor, there were multiple hearings on the DOC, the Department of Corrections behavior and things that they were doing. And now that it's run all by Dems, the Dems don't want to call themselves out because the director of the DOC is appointed by the governor, and who was also a Snyder appointment, by the way. She was a Republican appointment. And so I think that we need to push for the oversight passage to happen. I know there's an omnibus coming with that is including a bunch of oversight for the whole department. I wanted a women's specific one. I think that there has to be representation that's different for the women. And I always start with the women, not just because I love somebody very much that lives there, but also because the women get left out of things. And I think that the gendered specific nature of their incarceration is very, very different than men's prisons. And so I wanted the oversight to be specific for them. And that the prison is historically plagued with all kinds of violations. And there was just another suicide 2 weeks ago at the women's prison. And in segregation, there seems to be every 3 months, this feels like there's a suicide that happens there. And so it's a place that needs outside oversight, hands down. So I guess we're in a good place. I think I really believe if we can muster the energy for a campaign, it should focus on closure. And the next step should be a bill to keep women who are parents or pregnant out of the prison altogether. So that would be an incrementalist step towards the closure of that facility. I don't think it's redeemable. I think that it is, and we didn't even get into some of the housing units there, which are really, really pitiful. I'm talking like 9x9 cells with 2 women, a toilet and a sink. So you're pooping in a person's space regularly. And I think that, that is not humane. It's not a way that people should live. My daughter is like, doesn't poop fly around the room? Isn't that unsanitary when you flush a toilet in a space like that? And so, yeah, it's unsanitary and it's inhumane, and that whole prison needs shut. That's it. I could go on about it for days, and Siwatu could too, but it is not a healthy place.
You brought up the omnibus bill, and I know of it because of Lauren Underwood from Chicago and the work that she's been doing. And Siwatu, I know that while your roots are in Detroit, I'm sure you're thinking about scaling this work up, about how this can affect places outside of Huron Valley. Can you tell me your vision for basically the principles of the bill that didn't end up getting passed, even though you had some wins, or any hopes that you have for the omnibus bill, or any interaction you've been able to have with that team that's working in DC to get that through, any demands that you'd like to make of them? Natalie talked about gender specific, writing in some very specific things around gender. Can you talk to me about your vision for this work beyond Huron Valley?
Yeah, it don't stop here. It doesn't stop here. And I think the thing that really was different about this campaign Well, for one, I want to just point out that this is a session on feminism, abolition. And so, and I'm not talking about like white women feminism. I'm talking about like given, like rooted in like the voices, like feminist values, rooted in like the voices of Black, Brown, Indigenous people, and centering the realities and experiences that that is home to them, and then adopting a vision that best centers that experience, and then drafting legislation and campaign work and like cultural work and activism work around that very thing. And so Natalie was talking about like, you know, the developments of that work, and it wasn't our dream bill. It wasn't what we wanted. But one thing I think is powerful that my mom reminded me was that she says that if you incarcerate a mother, you don't just incarcerate her, you incarcerate her entire family. And so that includes your brothers, your uncles, your fathers, like it also it extends to this other, like, you know, multi-generation, multi-gendered, you know what I'm saying, like reality as well. And so when we center that, which what I learned through this process was that when you focus through the experiences of women, that we've actually seen this bill also be in support of like fragile people, right? Sick people in prison. You know, and so you didn't have to be pregnant. And so that's to me, I think is a very special thing to point out, that like, this is how we win. This is how we continue to chip away by centering the most vulnerable, which are like, you know, femme folks, like women, you know what I'm saying? Like nurturers, caretakers, like that I think is where the power lies. And so that's that's the piece of work that I think is continuing to grow. And so I think, you know, we've been able to connect with other groups and other organizations that are doing this work, you know, work around, you know, all of our comrades in California who's working to close down the women prisons in California, you know, the work that they did around California Coalition for Women's Prisoners, who did the work around forced sterilization. You got, you know, the connections in Florida, which, you know, they're doing a lot of work around youth prisons. You know, you have, you know, so many, you know, ways that this work very much is able to extend to different parts of movement work. So, and that's kind of like where my brain is always in. It's like, how are we like, this isn't just work for organizations or groups or passionate people who are centering, you know, anti-shackling, right, you know what I'm saying, like standards of care for pregnant folks. But this is actually an opportunity for the larger movement to get involved. So I see this as like I see this as national work. We got a lot. Michigan is terribly and pitifully far behind in terms of like, you know, how are we advancing and centering the dignity of people inside the prison? So we got a lot to learn. And so I'm encouraging, and Freedom Team Detroit, which directly comes out of the Free Siwatu campaign. We're no longer the Free Siwatu campaign, but we are now Freedom Team Detroit, which we share everything that we learned through this process of freedom and with other communities who are also entangled in the system. And so, yes, this works very much.
And how can people reach Freedom Team? Is it freedomteam.org or?
Oh yeah, as soon as we get enough money for the website, we're gonna get Freedom Team, you know, .com. But right now we're physically sponsored through LI Media, but you can contact us on Free Siwatu campaign, freesiwatu.org, or you can email me at freedomteamdetroit@gmail.com. They got email. And then I think we got a Facebook, and I can put the Facebook in the chat.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I first of all want to thank Abby and Angela and Tori for staying in this. Tell us the Facebook name, because we won't have a chat when we cut this up and do things like put it on the Color Change platform. But can you tell me the Facebook?
Yeah, it's Free Siwatu.
Mhm.
And then Natalie, also through AFSC, American Friends Service Committee, we also have we have a kind of like a beautiful immersive storytelling sharing that lives on AFSC's website, and it's AFSC /kites.org, I think, right, Natalie, is that it?
That was a really beautiful project that happened when you were inside Siwatu, the kite. Can you describe that project around the kites?
Yeah, the Kites on Kites project was basically, and these are the kites that are behind me. These are the kites right here. These beautiful kites. These because that is how people inside of prison communicate, through kites. And so you needed healthcare, you have to send a kite. You need to visit the library, you have to send a kite. And so basically a kite is you writing your need, or writing whatever you need to communicate to the administration. And you fold it up and you put it in the box, and you pray that it gets to the person that it needs to get to, so that your needs are met, which are not, it's not like a democratic, like that's not a process of like getting your needs met. And so
It's also how people communicate with each other, right?
It is, yep. And so folks would communicate, and we did, that was a lot of how we also got the baby shower items that happened, because we were able to do a baby shower kind of thing. And so, yes, you needed to communicate with someone, right? I mean, you're going to do what you need to do. So you go write your note, and you send it along. So that is like the medium inside of the prison. And we thought of like, it would be really beautiful. It would be really symbolic to have the outside community engage in this, in writing kites with us. But this time writing kites for hope. And so, yeah, those kites actually made it on actual kites that was flown at one of the Detroit Kites festivals.
Yes.
Yeah.
Shout out to Invincible, who helped organize that. You talk about modesty. I thought that the baby shower, can you describe what you did for the people who were in your unit, not just you, but what you helped organize around that baby shower campaign or fundraiser? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was the baby shower. It was something beautiful that came out of this.
That's beautiful.
So yeah, it was basically, we asked moms especially moms who had either just given birth or was about to give birth, to write down all of the items that they would have gotten their babies on their own, or items that they feel like that they would have opened at their own baby showers when they were at home with their families and friends. And I told them not to be modest, like whatever it is that you want. And like, if we couldn't get it, then we couldn't get it, but we were going to try. And so I ripped a piece of paper off, and it traveled, and I wrote at the top, like, baby shower wish items. Please write down what you want. And that piece of paper made it around the entire, secretly, because you could not openly just pass things. It is absolutely against the rules to pass something from one person to another. So the piece of paper secretly made it from one cell to the next, where mamas wrote down their wish items. And eventually that piece of paper made it back to my cell, and I mailed it off to Invincible and the rest of the Freedom team, and they put out the memo to fundraise for those items. And I got mamas who came to me and said, Siwatu, like, I just called my family and they said a package just arrived with all of the items.
So beautiful. So beautiful.
Yeah, it's definitely a moment to hold on to.
Yes. Well, I was going to suggest that we close it out. I don't know if there are questions. I had a question from Tori that I answered. They were asking about the books that I had mentioned. And so I put those, the links to those books. And good places, not Amazon. Sometimes we have to use Amazon. Like the baby shower that Siwatu was just talking about, but we talked about Mariam Kaba's We Do This Till We Free Us. I gave a Haymarket Books link for Mariam Kaba and Shira Hassan's Fumbling Towards Repair. I gave an akpress.org link, and for Ruthie Wilson Gilmore, I gave a Verso Books link for her essays on abolition geography. I don't know if you had any kind of closing words, Natalie, that you wanted to end on, or?
Well, Sheena called back, so she's here, and I'm going to pass it to her.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Go ahead, babe.
I was just listening. It was just such a powerful depiction of like the love that happens in here, and when Siwatu was able to send a kite throughout the whole facility to get the wishes of other mothers. We do this for each other, and I love the Mariam Kaba's We Do This Till We Free Us, because that's what we do. This is what we do. You know, women, right? And we have built community here. We have built a community of mothers and grandmothers and daughters and just well wishers and builders, right? And we love on each other. When for all intents and purposes, when you know, for even those of us who have family and who have support, who are blessed enough to have community support and to have loving families that hold us down through this experience. At the end of the day, when the phones aren't working and we can't have any visits and the mail isn't running, we're all we got. Mm. And we come together to hold each other up and lift each other up. When bad news comes because a child has died or a parent has passed on or any tragedy that happens, and that because life continues to go on and people die while we're incarcerated. And when that news comes through, we are the ones that hold each other up, and we come together and we celebrate each other's successes and we mourn each other's losses. And we are human beings. And people who work here do not work at General Motors or the other big remote companies. They do not work with machinery. They work with real human beings with feelings and flesh and stories that are important. And I'm grateful to Siwatu. I'm grateful to you, Dream, and I'm grateful to you, Natalie, always for uplifting those stories, uplifting us in a way to allow us to know who we are is more than any decisions or decisions that we made at any point in our lives that brought us here. And we all, and I speak very freely for all of us, for the majority of the women that I've met since I've lived here, the 24 years that I've been gone from my community. We are all looking for an opportunity to be better and to show ourselves to be more than the poor decisions that we made at any given point in our lives. And we're grateful. We're grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been my honor to be on a panel with you. Rebecca Mercado Jones, thank you so much for co-organizing.
Thank you. Thank you for making the idea come to life. I'm so grateful, Siwatu. I'm so grateful, Natalie. And I'm so grateful to Sheena. Thank you for sharing your stories and your experiences, and more importantly, for your advocacy. I'm sure that the gifts that you've given will be multi-generational. So I appreciate it very much. And thank you for your time.
And we got to work on that fundraiser for the Freedom Team, Siwatu. So that's the next thing. Absolutely, get y'all up and running.
I love you, Tashina. I'm so grateful for you. I needed to say that, you know.
Yes.
Free Tashina. Free Tashina.
That's right.
Free her yesterday. Yes, free her now.
All right. Well, thank you again for this conversation and for the work, more importantly. I'm sure this will be edited to a certain extent, but I'll send it out to folks before we do that and share it. And I just appreciate you all. Have a good night and take care of each other.
Yes, thank you so much.
Peace.
Thank you for having us.
Oh, of course, it's my honor. Thank you. Bye.